need to add to stream. That's how it works. And I bet Jay can hear me now.
Hey, yeah, I can hear you.
Nope, I can't hear Jay. Jay, there we go. It actually works. Look at that. Welcome to the live stream. Welcome to Squirrel's Office Hour. Welcome to my shed. You may hear the dog barking and the sheep bleating. I'm going to go do the magic to put this out to the world. So, oh, it was up here before. Now, why can't I find it? This is always frustrating. Oh, view on Facebook. Ah, that's going to do the trick. Okay, good. Okay. So let me just go find things so people know where to find us and we can do the official announcement. There we go. And we'll get all the links out to the world. I'm hearing myself. Nice feedback. So that I think means that we're actually out. There we go. Still debugging and figuring out how StreamYard works and so on. This will become a smooth and an easy process at some point, but not yet. I'm still learning.
So am I on it side by side with you at the moment?
You are. I can hear you, Jay. It's working great. That's no problem. And let me just close. Oh no. Yeah. Okay. Good. I didn't close the wrong thing. I don't think I did. Oh no. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm in the right thing. Good. Okay. I was worried that I'd closed the wrong window. Did I? Yes. No, I did not. Okay. Hi, Jay. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So I'm sure viewers will join us as we go. We may get no viewers. Who knows? Anything could happen. This is live. You never know what happens on live streaming. But I think I've now posted everything. I think it's now out to the world, so people can join us and listen in. If people are joining us, they can make comments, and we'll answer questions. And I'm happy to take them on any topic. But our focus today is on tech due diligence, which Jay approached me about. He said, hey, Squirrel, I'd like to understand more about what to expect in Tech DD. And that's going to be our theme, at least for the beginning. And who knows what questions we'll get and what will happen. Cool. Jay, would you like to give a brief introduction? Who are you, where you come from, what makes you interested in tech due diligence?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Jay. I started a company called Kiroku about 3 years ago. My background previous to that was I did computer science, and I went into natural language processing at Cambridge for a couple of years. Then I joined the Entrepreneur Affairs program, where it's for those who don't know, it's a tech accelerator where they help individuals come up with ideas, give them funding, give them mentorship, and so on. So that was my story about 3 years ago. And then I met my co-founder, Hannah, who is a dentist. And together we started Kiroku because I came across the problem that dentists spend far too long writing admin. And we set out on the mission to automate this process. So how can we improve their workflow, and not just for dentistry, but for medicine, for any other field? How can we use my background, artificial intelligence, and Hannah's background to come up with a solution to this? And our company's gone through various stages. We've raised a pre-seed round and a seed round, and we're looking towards moving to our Series A. And that's where I came across Douglas, where I know that Douglas has worked on tech due diligence for quite a few companies before, and he's helped companies in this way. And I thought it'd be good to start getting things lined up and to see what are the tick boxes we need to go through.
Got it. Makes sense. So you're thinking that the investors who come to you for Series A are likely to want you to do some tech due diligence, and you're wanting to know what to expect, what might happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. So some of our viewers will have been through tech due diligence before. Some of you will be like Jay, you've not experienced it before. It'll be new to you. So I'm going to start from the very beginning, as if you don't know anything. And if you're viewing this back later, you can fast forward. So I'll start at the beginning. So a VC typically approaches me for due diligence when they have something that is beyond their knowledge. So they're looking for me to help interpret what somebody like Jay has done, what AI you've put in place for dentists, and to interpret that and explain it to them. So they'll be usually the way I structure it is I ask them for some business focused questions, which then I can give them a tech answer to. So typical questions would be things like this: is the team ready to scale? How's that Jay guy? Is he capable of taking the team to the next level? Does he need some help? Is he even the right person? Should we keep him around? Don't worry, I don't normally recommend that they get rid of the CTO. That I have, but not often. You have to have screwed up pretty badly for me to recommend that. Then they'll ask other things like, is this real AI? That's often a question because certain types of founders, I'm sure Jay is not this type of founder, will say, oh yeah, we have artificial intelligence consisting of these people over here, and they type stuff in and they do things. That's our artificial intelligence. And so the VCs will be skeptical of how much real AI, real machine learning is actually happening. Hi, Tim, nice to see you. So we're getting some viewers turning up now. So those folks will, just to fill in people who just arrived, we're doing tech due diligence. So Jay's asked me what to expect in tech due diligence. What do I do? So I'm starting from the beginning. So I'll get these questions. Another one might be, what product opportunities are there? Should we branch out to doctors? Should we go from dentists to doctors? Should we instead stick with dentists, but really go into the surgical end rather than the retail end, or go from one to surgical retail, whichever? Should we be expanding in certain directions? What opportunities are there for the product? So that'd be a product-focused question. And then there might be specific issues like we've talked to some customers, because that'll be part of the broader due diligence that the VC will be doing. And we talked to some customers, and they say that this application is down a lot, that there seem to be a lot of problems. I'm sure yours actually isn't, but imagining that they might get that kind of feedback or some other feedback from customers, and they'll say, can you check what's going on there? Is Jay on top of that, or are the team solving that? So that would be the kinds of questions that someone might focus on, and that's questions I ask them to give me so that I can write in the eventual report that I produce, in the executive summary, answers to each of those questions. Because some folks won't read any more than that. There's a whole bunch more in my report, but often that's mainly focused on maybe a more junior person within the VC who will actually be tasked with reading the detail, and of course the company itself. So what I'm doing is assessing for their benefit, and they will often benefit most from answers to those focused questions. And then there's like 20 pages of report that I produce, typically for a full-scale DD, and I'll often have a person help me with that. So I have a group of other CTOs who come along and help me cover some of the areas. And what I do is I always send this big email. And I, by the way, I should mention, I'm not sure I do this like most other people do. I'll come back, come back at the end and say more what other folks do in due diligence, because I think they may do it a little differently. But what I do is I'll get introduced to Jay, and I'll say, Jay, here's an email with everything you need to know. And I always give a prelude to the email, which is, this is a scary email. Don't be scared, because it sounds like it's hours and hours of work, and you're going to be, slaving till midnight to give me all kinds of information, because I ask for the world. I ask for a whole bunch of information about recent events, who you've hired, what your hiring plans are, what feedback you've given to people in your team. There's a whole raft of things I can go into more if Jay's interested or listeners are interested. And I ask for a whole bunch of different documents. So I'll ask for recent board reports, technical reports you might produce each week to show how many dentists have signed up, or how many outages you had, that kind of thing. Access to a bunch of different systems. So your source code, your task tracking, whether that's Pivotal or Jira or whatever you're using. And then I'll ask you to book sessions, taking usually most of a day, with a whole bunch of people in your team, and I identify the types of roles. So in your team with AI, I definitely want to talk to somebody in data science. You might or might not have a QA person, but if you do, I'd definitely like to talk to them. You'll have probably some kind of product person. And many of these roles, especially when you're going from seed to Series A, you may not have some of them, and that's okay. And I don't expect you to book me with a person who doesn't exist. But whoever's playing that role is helpful to talk to. And I will always include a few people who are not in the business. Not in the tech side, but in the business. So these are a head of marketing, typically the CEO. So you mentioned your dentist partner who started the business with you. That person might be someone I very much like to talk to, because I want an outside view on the tech team too. Often I'll get a clear view of how the tech team views itself. myself, but not of how other people view it. I typically won't talk to customers because that's part of the larger due diligence usually. So I send you this great big email and I say, don't be scared because it actually only takes you an hour or two to do, because the key thing is, and I'd strongly encourage you to avoid this, I don't want you to go write me a 100 slide deck. The first few times I did this, a couple people did that, and I thought, oh my God, you could have spent this week like building more things for dentists. This would have been much better. So don't do that. Just give me the documents that you do have. We don't have an architecture diagram. Great. So I'll note maybe it would be a good idea to write an architecture diagram, but let's draw one together. So I would urge Jay, and other people who might be facing this, don't go write a whole bunch of documents, try to put everything in place like the week before. First of all, I'll know because it'll be really evident that you've just put this together. And second, it's a waste of your time. It's not helpful. What we want to see is what the actual situation is in the company. So I'll say more about kind of what happens on the day and then how I write up the report. But I'll stop there. Jay, any questions about that? And viewers should also be feel free to fire in questions. Go ahead and put them in whatever platform you're using. As far as I know, we're still figuring out this platform, but I think I will see them and happy to wrap them in. So Jay, that makes sense so far? Any questions?
Yeah, so I've got two questions, but you may be coming on to them, so I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, go ahead.
One is around, you mentioned about scalability of teams, how our team can scale.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean purely in terms of leadership? Can we hire the right people, or more in terms of, is our code base at a place where a new developer can jump on really quickly? And the second question was around, you mentioned things like creating an architectural diagram. That's still on our to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a checklist of things that we should be we're looking at a year in advance? Is there a checklist of things that we can start doing now to get ready for that? Guessing you're going to come onto that anyway.
Yep. And I'm just putting those in the chat so that then I can put them on the screen. If I do all the magic, I think I can do the magic right so that then we'll know what questions we're answering. But that's great. And feel free to interrupt me, by the way, Jay. So stop me and say, wait, I didn't understand that. So I'm not fussed about that at all. What checklist could we use for scaling? That's a great question. So I think what I'll do is I'll do the first one now because then I can cover that, and then I'll cover the second one as I'm talking about the write-up, I think, because I can talk about the things that I look for, but don't let me forget to cover it. And again, viewers, feel free to throw in questions. So the question was, what do VCs mean by scalability? Most of the time they don't know. So I try to answer more comprehensively, but sometimes they do. So sometimes they will say, well, look, it looks like these guys are doing fine technically, and everything we're seeing so far looks like it's okay. We're not so worried about the tech for one reason or another. They have a lot of established customers. The feedback is really good. I had one just recently where they're doing very complex insurance for container ships, and they had great feedback from all the customers. The system was up all the time. But they were more concerned about, how is this running internally? How are the team doing? Or you can have the opposite. So we're really confident in the team. They look great. We're really doubtful about the tech. So sometimes you get that kind of feedback. But most of the time, they just mean, is our investment safe? We've made and that's why I want to see things like the board pack or the investor pitch, because I want to be able to say, these folks are planning to triple their business in the next 7 months. And they're in no place to do that. They've got 2 developers, and both of them are junior, and the CTO is trying also to be the head of product and chief salesman. This is a disaster. Look out. And you need to do a lot here in order for this company to scale, and that would be a more people-focused one. It may also be that these folks have built their software out of sealing wax and hope, and there's nothing really here, and it's all outsourced, and it's a big mess that hasn't been managed properly. So you need to do a lot on the tech side. So really, the VCs don't know what they mean by scalability. That's actually the main problem. Now I don't know, how do I get rid of this question? Oh, hide. There we go. Wow, just like I knew what I was doing. Excellent. So let me go on and talk about what happens when I turn up. So and it's usually me and a friend. So I have, as I said, different folks who come along and help me out. And it used to be that we'd actually go to where the person was. We even got on planes and went to Berlin and other places. These days, of course, it's all virtual. But either way, we're turning up, and you, Jay, have put together a schedule for us. You've defined outlined, here are all the different things, all the different people that you're going to see. And we have essentially, you could call it a checklist. That's why I wanted to delay the scalability checklist question till later. It's essentially an outline of what will be covered, and I include that in the email. So I give you an outline of all the different things I'm going to cover. I don't usually share the focus question because sometimes they're the ones that come from the VC. Because sometimes they're like, "What about that J person?" And I don't want to change the discussion. But I will share the outline, so you've seen that. And then what I'm doing is going along and ticking those off as I talk to each group, and I have an idea of each group or person what they're going to cover. So I'm going to ask product-focused questions and product direction and product process of product managers and possibly also individual developers and maybe somebody outside the team to see how the product process goes. How do they get ideas? How do they feed in requests and so on? I'll be asking. I'll spend certainly a lot of time with you, Jay, because you'll tell me all about the architecture. You might draw that architecture diagram for me. You might take me through some of the recent challenges. You will have answered that list of questions for me, so that will prompt me with some things. Oh, yes. So I see that you said you had an outage 3 weeks ago. Can you share with me the root cause analysis you did? What are the tasks you did? What did you do about that? And often during those conversations, we'll also turn up new documents and new pieces of information we'll want to get. So typically at the end of that day, I'll send you a list that has a whole bunch of other things that we identified for each person. And some, certainly a very important person is the system admin. I don't like the term DevOps, that means something else, but the person who's looking after the system, and that person will say, oh yes, and we use Grafana and we have great graphs that show us, oh, can you get us a screenshot of that? Yes, here's our continuous integration process, and I'll say, oh yeah, can you get me a screenshot of what that looks like? Then we'll go through it, and that's the human side of it. So we get as much information as possible. Usually me and my colleague are really tired at the end of that. You're usually not as tired because it's different folks that we see. We have to go through all of them and take tons and tons of notes. I'll fill my notebook with loads of notes. And then there's a further information gathering piece, which is we go to the systems. Now, sometimes folks are very picky about these. I'm not sure quite, you've got healthcare data, so that could be sensitive for you. Sometimes they will say, look, we're just not allowed to put up as much information as to share it outside our network. So if we're on site, then we have to sit with somebody and go and look at it. If we're remote, then sometimes we'll just have to screen share and look at it. But the best situation is where we can actually look offline. And typically I'll delegate to my colleague to go and dig into the source code. I'll read some of it, but usually give that to that person. They're more technically focused than I am. And then I'll be doing things like looking in the task tracker, Pivotal, or Jira, or whatever it is, and getting lots of information from that. So working away on those things typically, the day or so afterwards, as we're also writing up. And what we do is a very simple process in principle. We take that big outline and go through it and write some fairly standard text for each thing. A lot of it, these reports are not great novels, right? They're not huge variation in what they say, but there's always different things for each one. So I'll cover in the very first section who is in the team, where physically are they, how are they structured, who reports to whom. Sometimes that's surprisingly difficult to figure out in an early stage company because nobody knows who reports to whom, so that is a comment in itself. And so the report will turn out to be about 20 pages for one of these full due diligences, and it'll cover each of those topic areas in some depth. And each one will come with recommendations. So we might have detected that, I'll pick something at random that Jay doesn't, well, you said it, Jay doesn't have an architecture diagram. So I'll say in the architecture section, or my colleague, if they're writing that up, it would benefit Heroku to have a architecture diagram that would help. And here's what it might look like, here's what the benefits would be, and then that's something that you can take or leave. There might be stronger recommendations, like you should definitely hire a product manager tomorrow because your product process is really in a big mess. And I'll put that more professionally, but it'll basically say that. And that might be colored red or highlighted in the executive summary, because that would be a danger signal for the VC. And of course, then I also write up the executive summary, which then points to the other parts of the write-up. Now I'll come to your scalability question and talking about checklists in a minute. Does that make sense to you, Jay? And also viewers, again, feel free to throw in questions.
Yeah.
How's that process make sense? Does that make sense?
So Yeah, so one question, I'm sure most founders feel the same thing, but tech due diligence is a scary process to an extent
Mhm.
because you don't know what you could be missing.
Mhm.
How close to the investment part do you actually do the due diligence? At what stage usually? Is it normally when there's already
Very
a
good
term
question.
sheet?
Yep,
And
yep.
then how much
So,
time is there for somebody to actually make changes for that?
very good question. So first one, and let me just write that up. So when does tech DD happen in the investment process? There we go. Maybe I'll figure out how to do this more fancily, but I think I can just type it there and put it up. So normally, and this varies. So sometimes I've done tech DD after the investment has happened. That would be unusual. And occasionally I'll do tech DD before a term sheet, but that would be pretty strange because the VC hasn't really committed then. And of course, the startup doesn't have some of the legal stuff in place, isn't feeling as confident, probably talk to many VCs. So typically after term sheet, and usually too late. So usually the VC waits too long, and very frequently they'll say, Squirrel, can you do this super quick? How about tomorrow? How about next week? And we're kind of scrambling to get it done. That's the more typical situation. There are some who are a little more organized. There are cases where I have plenty of time, but typically we're kind of right up against the moment when somebody's going to write a check, and the tech DD is one of the last things. It also costs them costs you a bunch of money. Actually, the way they do it is I charge them, but then they put it in your in your package. So actually, you get this many million, and then you also get to pay the costs of the VC. So you get that many, thousands less. So they also don't want to incur that cost too early. Typically, if they're going to back out, they want to back out before they incur the cost, which makes sense. So you asked also, do we have a chance to fix some of these things? The answer is almost always no. And that's simply because we're usually crunched up against a fairly short time between when the term sheet comes and when they invest, and usually toward the end of that time. I wouldn't panic about that, though, because any good VC, anyone that I'd work with, for example, would not put you under pressure to fix anything but the most egregious problems. They wouldn't say, now you better draw your architecture diagram or we're not going to write you the check. That would be ridiculous and really silly. So I imagine there are some out there who do that. I wouldn't work with them. So what I'd expect is, and what I'd expect you to see is, here's one we're really concerned about. We want you to address this one. I had one recently where the main issue was it was like what I was referring to before. Nobody knew who anybody reported to. The whole reporting lines was a complete mess. And I said, this isn't going to scale. You're trying to triple the team, and you don't have any reporting lines. Everybody nominally reports to the CTO, but that's not working, right? You're not going to have 60 people do that. So they had to sit down in a serious conversation. They didn't come back to me. I'll say more about coming up post report activities in a second. But they didn't come back to me and say, Squirrel, we didn't like this. So I assumed that they put in place something reasonable because the VC was saying, look, this is a strong enough recommendation from Squirrel that we think this is not going to go. We're not going to write you a check unless you do this. But the intention wasn't that they then fix it before the check was written. The intention was that they said, yep, we definitely will do that. We'll be responsible at the first board meeting. We'll tell you how that happens. Nobody would have expected them to suddenly put in place reporting lines, have all their one-on-ones, have everybody officially signed up in 2 days. That would have been silly. But sometimes you will get something that's an egregious enough problem that they will sit you down and say, we want you to fix this. Much more commonly, they'll say, great, we want to hear how you're working through these recommendations at the first board meeting. And not uncommonly, they'll say, here are some recommendations. We hope you do them. And they forget about it. So those are the two more common examples. Does that answer your question? Does that help?
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Cool. So let me talk then about what happens afterward, and I'll also comment on checklists. So I've finished the report. My colleague has finished their part. We've done some quality checks. We sent that off to the VC. That's typically a week afterward. I do have a hurry up service when they're really crunched, where I write a really short summary and then I talk to them afterwards, and that I can do in a day. But I charge more because that's a complex process, and I'll cram it in as hard. So once I've finished, then the report goes to the VC. It doesn't go to you. And very rarely the VC will ask me to send it to you as well. But typically they want to see it first because it's their questions. It's informing their investment decision. But I think in every case, I don't think I've ever had a case where the VC didn't then share it with the startup. Because why would you hire me? Because I tend to write these opinionated reports with all the recommendations. It'd be silly to hire me to do that without sharing with you. And then I will almost always have a debrief with the VC. Occasionally, they'll just say, thanks for the report and go on. But most often, they'll want to say, what about recommendation 7? What about this question? Can you tell us more? And my colleague and I will do that. And that's part of the whole process. And then we offer, and about 50% of the time, the startup will say, yeah, we'd like to talk to them too, and we'd like to ask the same kind of questions. And that's always a good sign. That's part of the service, doesn't cost any more, and I frankly enjoy doing that. And I think it's a good service. So I think then we've gone through the whole life cycle of TechDD. Makes sense so far? Any questions? Also, viewers, feel free to throw in questions. Jay, that makes sense. I'm going to come back to your question about checklist for scaling.
Yeah, no, all sounds good so far.
Fantastic. Well, let's come to that then. So this sounds like the sort of thing maybe I should do another office hour on, or that I should write a blog post about, or something like that. So I'm going to do it off the cuff, but I may miss a few things, and don't hang me if I do that. But the sorts of things I look for, but specifically when a VC asks me for scaling advice, is this company ready to scale? I'm looking for first of all, the people's experience. So a amber flag, certainly not a red flag, especially at Series A, where you don't expect this, is nobody has ever scaled anything before. They're all completely fresh. It's never happened. It's a complete new thing for everyone in the whole business. I'm not as fussed if maybe the head of sales has scaled before, or if the head of operations. I don't need them necessarily to be in tech. But if somebody has gone from 5 people to 70, or from 10 people to 60, then you have some sense that somebody will have some idea how to do it. And it's even more reassuring if some people in the team have.
Yeah, would that usually be for the person that has scaled a team, or the person that's been part of a scaling team before?
I'd rather they led the scaling, but even being part of one is a helpful thing. And there's also an element of judgment there about the person's management skills. So do they ask good questions like you are, or are they just saying, oh yeah, it'll be fine? That the team that had the no reporting lines, they were very relaxed. They just said, oh, it'll be okay. We're doing fine now. We won't have any trouble. I said, I think you're going to have some trouble. So that did not build confidence. So there's both experience and management skill that's important. And I'll come back to architecture, because that's a very important area. The other one is product, process, and interaction with users. That's the more people and process end. So a place that people fall down a lot and have difficulty is they have not got a good method of getting user feedback, asking users for feedback, understanding their users. They're going into a new market. That's often quite dangerous. I've got a client I've just finished with consulting, who is embarking on the journey of going to enterprise from retail. So imagine if you stopped selling to dentists and you started selling to dental hospitals, right? That would be a very different world. Yeah. And that's an extra challenge. And if nobody has done it, again, that's a risk. But one of the challenges is, how the heck do you figure out what you're supposed to build? For you can probably go ask some individual dentists. What do you do with the hospital? Very different world. So those are the people and process ones, the main ones that I can think of. Sometimes there are processes and tools that are poor, that really won't scale, but those tend to be pretty obvious. I wouldn't put them on a checklist, because you would know if you were using 4 different systems to track your tasks to work on. I'd say probably ought to consolidate those, because when you get to 4 teams, 2 of whom are in another country, maybe you'd want not to be confused by which one's using Pivotal and which one's in Jira. But those are more rare. As far as architecture and scaling on the technical side, the things to watch out for there are horizontal scalability. So often we'll identify a bottleneck, and we'll say, if you suddenly doubled your traffic, this is often a question to that system admin type person. If you doubled your traffic tomorrow, what would break first? And they say, oh, well, our email server, we've only got one of them. We can't horizontally scale it. Okay, that's one definitely to note down. If you've got all of your requests going to a set of workers, and those workers are on server, are set up so they're interdependent instead of being independent, so that you can't horizontally scale them. That would be a thing to watch out for. Now, what else is there? So hosting costs. Almost everybody's cloud hosted these days. There's the occasional somebody who's still running in a dedicated data center. That is usually a scaling problem because you have to physically rack hardware and so on. That takes longer to scale. But assuming you're not doing that, then we have a look at your AWS or cloud platform or whatever it is you're on bills. And if those are out of whack for where you are, and that's a judgment call, but if those are out of whack, then you're probably in trouble for scaling. Oh, I forgot an important one, sorry, which is also budgetary, and that's if your team is very junior. So if you haven't got seniors who can onboard and help others to learn and grow, then you're probably going to have a scaling problem. Not always, there's occasional exceptions, but typically you want at least an even mix of seniors to juniors, if not more seniors than juniors. That's an opinion of mine. That's one place where I'm opinionated, and not sure everybody agrees about that, but that's certainly my view, is that you're going to have more trouble scaling if you've got a team of fresh, green, eager folks who aren't sure how anything works, and then you suddenly add 20 more of those, and it doesn't work so well.
I've got one question around the hosting system. So.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
As a startup, you're normally given a ton of free credits from whether you use AWS, Google, and so on.
Yeah, they love giving you credits. They want you to be locked into them forever. Yep.
Obviously, the idea is to experiment and see what works for you and just play around without worrying about the huge billing costs behind them. Mm-hmm. At what point should a startup start to think about, even though it's free right now, but think about the budget, think about the spending for each thing? Should that be right from the beginning? Should it be something that you
I would calculate what your bill would have been, and I would keep track of that. And if it were out of whack, if you said to yourself, when I multiply this by 20, I get a number that doesn't fit our financial models, that would be something I would check. Because those folks love to get you hooked in, and then you're using some expensive service, suddenly your credits run out, and then they say, well, here's your bill for zillions. And I've seen a few that are in that state and trying to get out of it. So absolutely, I would do that early, and give yourself kind of a fake bill. So this is what my bill would have been. The nice thing is when they're doing those credits, they often give you an account manager to kind of hold your hand and help you. So I would say, all right, so tell me what would my bill have been? Make them do the work.
And on the senior, sorry, is it quite noisy? I can shut my window.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry.
On this, on the team seniority, this is something where, for example, as a startup, you may not need a DevOps or systems engineer to start with. You may want someone to come in and be able to help. What's your opinion on bringing in somebody senior to set up the process, to teach the junior, the less experienced people how to do things, and then take it on from there?
I'm a big fan. That is often very helpful. You can have that person fractionally or for a short time, and then you get the systems in place. You do want at least somebody in the team who's got some battle scars. So typically, if I see a completely green team, that gets me quite worried, because even though you may have had some helpful people get you set up, those people aren't around now. The VC is investing in who's there now. So that would make me nervous. But absolutely, using somebody like that, I often do that on the people and process side. There are certainly people who do that on system engineering. A good one I know, for example, is John Topper from Scale Factory. Has a kind of repeatable process, does it for early stage startups all the time. And if I see that they've been in, or somebody like that, and they've got a really nice architectural setup, and maybe they haven't got somebody in-house who does that, but they have somebody they can call on, very, very helpful. That's definitely a plus sign. Let me just think if I can come up with anything else in the our tech side. So the other one that's really prominent, really important, of course, is tests of some variety and continuous integration, continuous deployment. Thank heavens, 15 years ago, this was not standard. It is standard now, thank heavens. So that's much better. That people pretty typically have something in this area, but looking at the quality, the level of testing, the commitment to testing that the team have, because as you start to scale, you're going to put more pressure on the system. You want to make sure that, and you're going to start making changes to it more quickly with more people who are less experienced with it. So you want a good safety net of tests. So test coverage, certainly if you don't have test coverage now, that would be a good one to do as preparation. Just turn on a test coverage tool so you can report, yeah, here's a place where we have good test coverage, here's a place where we don't, here's what we're doing to address it. That's going to reassure a due diligence person with no little effort for you.
for test coverage, where would you say is a good benchmark to go for, to aim for? Some people say 80%, some people say lower.
I tend to say 80%, but you know what? If you're measuring it and improving it, that's actually the most important thing. And there's no rock solid evidence. You know, I've had medical device companies that try to get to 100% because they really don't want to kill anybody. And e-commerce companies that say, look, we have some tests. They basically tell us that the thing's not broken, and we roll back if it's broken. That's okay. So it's different in different cases. In your case, you're probably in between those two. Now I just wanted to not forget something else. I think I've covered all the tech side. There is one other thing I want to mention, which is an important metric for me. It's not particularly on scalability, but it's an important metric I use, and it goes to kind of everything. It's such a good metric, and that is cycle time. Unfortunately, it's not a metric you can measure in a very specific number. Usually, it's not a meaningful metric that says it's 17.2. But what I'm looking for is roughly the order of magnitude of the time between when you have an idea and when an actual dentist somewhere is actually able to use it and give you some feedback. Doesn't mean it has to be rolled out to everyone, doesn't mean it has to be in a perfect state, but you want to be able to get feedback. And companies that have a really long cycle time have trouble scaling, but they also have trouble just servicing their customers. They have trouble keeping up with competitors. They have a lot of difficulties, and that'll again differ by industry. So I'd expect in healthcare, you're going to be a little slower. If you had a 1-day cycle and you were updating the dentist every day, that would be really impressive, but unusual. If you were in e-commerce and you weren't releasing every couple days, I would be really worried, because that's a lower risk area, and the feedback from customers is extremely important and readily available. Your dentists are probably less likely to tell you every day what they think, or to churn every day, whereas your e-commerce folks will be buying or not, and they want to give you feedback. So that's an important metric for me that I always report on, and it's one of the signal ones that I use.
Just to be clear though, so we have two, I guess, cycles. One is the product ideation phase, where we want to test an idea to see if it's viable. And that we try and do as much as we can without any code. So it'd be,
of course,
design.
That's not what I mean by cycle time. Good question. Good point. So when I'm talking about cycle time, I mean the time between when you've done that stuff and you're thinking, yeah, this is a goer. This seems pretty good, and the time when real code is actually running for a person and they can feedback. Now the other one's interesting too. I mean, if you spend ages just trying to do tons of user testing before you even get anything out to the users, that's a challenge. But I see that very rarely. The more common bottleneck is we're not able to prioritize well enough. We've got too few staff. We take too long to get the kind of perfect code before we give it to a user to test. Those are kinds of things that slow down the cycle time that I mean, the cycle time between the idea is ready and real code is running.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Cool. Glad to help with that one. Now, I had the feeling there was another item that I was going to try to cover. So I'm answering. That's right. I'm answering your question about checklist. I should have put that question up, shouldn't I? I'll just put it up here at the end so people can find it if they're scanning through the video. But scroll back, rewind, because I started talking about this question a while ago. I don't think there's a definitive checklist, but I think that if you got your people and process right, if you had your cycle time good, if you had good processes and tools for your team, if you have architecture that allows for horizontal scaling, if your hosting costs, even your fake hosting costs, are in line with expectations in your financial plans, and if you've got some measure of testing code coverage, you're going to be in pretty good shape. I imagine I've forgotten some, and I reserve the right to add more to that list, but I hope that's at least a helpful guide. How's that sound, Jay?
Yeah, it sounds good. I've got one question around monitoring. And
do you have
the...
By the way, I'll just note, Tim's asked a question which is not a due diligence question, so I'm going to come to that. I'm not going to hang up before that, but we'll do more due diligence with Jay first. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I was going to ask about monitoring. So as a company, we've started to look more and more into that recently. So started looking at tools like Datadog. What services Google provide around that.
Yeah.
What do you look for in that area? Do you look for just what are you monitoring, or how quickly you react to that? Is anything around that area really?
Sure. So at your stage, I should do the put it up thing. There we go. At your stage, I'd be looking for the existence of monitoring. So if you have some, I'm going to be pretty happy. Now, if you were at a later stage, Series B or C, really trying to scale much more substantially, trying to go into the US healthcare system or something like that, then I might, and the fact that you're in healthcare also, that might matter. Actually, tell me, how much does an outage or a problem hurt you? Are you live and like people are in pain and they can't have their tooth extracted until you help them?
No,
or
no.
is it
So
not
our
in the
system is purely a processing tool for their notes. So the worst case situation is they go back to what they're used to doing in just a slower way.
Got it. Okay. So we're not going to kill anybody. We're not going to cause anyone to have ongoing tooth pain or sue us. That's good, because then I would have a higher bar. If you
we
were
have
actually
angry dentists. That's about it.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to fix that. So then I would just look for you to have some means of monitoring. Certainly a thing that I'd look for maybe a little later is for you to have a rota and some method of monitoring out of hours, or make sure that you get alerted. I would look for an alerting process that at least make sure, at least when your users are on, when they care. If dentist offices are shut, you don't care, but if there's a problem, you want to know about it and get a reaction to it quickly. If it's the answer is just, oh, well, it gets sent to an email address and we check it when we remember, not so good. If it's, we get a text message at this location with this information, that's significantly better. Yeah, that would be a major one for monitoring, but at a later stage. For you, having some monitoring and having a way of debugging an outage, debugging a problem, understanding what's happening, so you're not completely surprised by it, that would be a step forward.
Great, thanks.
Cool. So Tim points out that his question was actually about due diligence. So actually, we will take that one. So so his question was, where do people fail their due diligence? Well, to be honest, I've done about 35 of these. I have never formally failed anybody. Actually, that's not quite true. There's one that I did, and it was kind of retrospective. It was when I was looking back. And I said, if you were investing, I would have told you not to, but you already did, so here's what you should do. And that was a really egregious failure. That was somebody who was rebuilding their software and hadn't released any new changes for 2 years. And that was not a very successful, that was not a happy situation. Some people got fired as a result of that investigation. I was not sorry. That was a reasonable outcome. But that's very unusual. So actually failing and actually getting a, you should not invest in this company is quite rare. Where do people have very significant kind of in red, look out for this, this is the danger? Where do I see that? I would say I see that with inexperience at senior level. So Jay, I'm just gonna pick on you because you happen to be on the screen, but I'm not saying this is true of you. But Jay, if you were someone who had built the team, were gung-ho about it, but had never built any kind of team before, had really built some things that didn't make any sense, some processes that were really kind of strange, then I would say we either need to move on from Jay, or we need Jay to have a friend. We need a VP of engineering. We need a new CTO to come in above Jay. We need something like that. And that would be the kind of thing I would signal quite heavily. I would say there's a real leadership problem. That can also happen in product. So you can have somebody in charge of the product function who really has been great up to this stage. Often there's no product person, so it's often a CEO type person. And then it can also be, if that person is really overloaded, not prioritizing well, not helping the team to function, that'll be a red signal. Look out, you need a product person. The CEO can no longer do it. Could do it when there were 4 of them. Now there's 10 and it's breaking, and at 20 or 30 or 40, it's going to collapse completely. So that's on the people and process side. Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, can I just dig into there? So when you mentioned around experience, is it more around what they've done since the beginning of that startup and what process they put in place, as well as their general experience, or is it more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if somebody has learned on the job and is showing real skill and capacity and is getting advice, for example, coming on somebody's office hours and asking about due diligence, that would be a really good sign. So if that person's doing well and learning through the process, that's fantastic. But what I'll often see is somebody who has built a kind of a goofy house of cards, and it's not really running well, and things are really having problems, and that person doesn't know what to do. Then I'll say, hey, this person's not going to make it to the next stage. This person needs some help. Was fine up to here, obviously got you to the stage where you wanted to invest. Don't continue with this person by themselves. then sometimes I'll say this person needs to move on, or sometimes I'll say, more often I'll say, need some experienced heads to come along and figure it out. On the code and architecture side, well, I have found keys of live keys for APIs and financial tools and so on in both in tracking systems and also in code. I don't go looking for those things. So one thing I should emphasize is I'm not an auditor, so I don't go try to find loads of problems. I don't have a script that goes and finds issues. I'm not a penetration tester, that kind of thing. But I've stumbled across that kind of thing, and that's definitely a red flag. That's a phone call to the VC and the CTO. Can you believe what I found? This should be gone now. So you want to watch for any of those kinds of things, just egregious security problems that you stumble across. Oh yeah, we're not encrypting our passwords. That would be a phone call, that we would not wait for the report on that one. And I'm trying to think where people have really failed on the tech side. I don't think I've encountered really serious concerns they can address. Things like we have no tests at all. I say, hire a QA, get these tests in, to delay the next stage, expect that your investment will run more slowly because we have to stop and make sure there's some tests in place. But that wouldn't be an egregious failure. That would just be, you should fix this right away. I'm thinking through my list. Nothing else is leaping out at me. Yeah, and another area is sometimes you get absolutely ridiculous hosting costs. Again, this isn't like a hard failure. This is just hey, you really should fix this. I've seen people with 100K per month hosting bills, dollars or pounds, and they are running a quite small service with very few users. High value users, but not very many. And they just say, oh, well, we never turn anything off. So maybe you should turn some things off. You'll figure out what you can turn off safely, because this is not sustainable and won't match the financial targets. So those are all the things I can think of. Again, I may think of some more later, but I hope that that's helpful. Tim, feel free to follow up if you've got more. One thing I definitely want to do before I go is to say a bit about what other due diligence looks like, and I haven't seen it as much, so it's going to be more what I've heard than what I've seen, but I do want to contrast, because Jay, you may not get me doing it. If you get me doing it, now you're all set. You know exactly what to expect, but if you get somebody else, maybe a bit different. Did you have more questions, Jay? Have I helped you with what to expect?
No, yeah, it definitely helps so far, thanks.
Fantastic. So then I'll just bring this up, and if people have other questions, including not due diligence questions, feel free in the last few minutes here. Very happy to cover those. So what I have heard that other folks do, it really varies. So some folks follow a very similar process to the one I just described. I think I'm probably one of the more disciplined, kind of structured people around. There is a company called, I think it's Intuitus, and they're up in Scotland, and they do a bunch, and they have a kind of well-defined process that they take their CTOs through, and they hire CTOs as freelance, and then say, go in and follow this process and follow these steps. But there can be very loose and very simple DD, and the very simplest one, which would be nothing as thorough as what I just described, is the VC will say to another portfolio company, somebody they've already invested in, hey, could you lend us your CTO for an afternoon or a couple of hours or an hour, and phone up Jay and just talk to him about it, and tell us if you hear any red flags. No preparation, no documents, no looking at the code, just chat to Jay. And that's easy. You get one of those, great. But that means you're not going to get the kind of recommendations and advice. You're not going to get a deep look at scaling issues and so on. You're going to get a quick conversation covering a lot of the same topics. So the person will be interested in each of these topics, but probably not as structured, and it's not going to be their day job. It's not going to be something they do all the time, whereas I do, as I say, 10, 20, 30 of these a year. So that's one thing. That's a kind of the loosest end. And the type of report you get back varies. So on one of those, it might be just a phone call to the VC. So it might be, yeah, you passed. No, thanks, no report. Could be you get a page summary with a few comments on what the team is doing. it could be that you get a more thorough report of the kind that I do. I think what's unusual about what I do is how many recommendations I give. So I think that's an unusual thing, and I tend to work with VCs who like that, who want that advice for them and for you. So I think you would probably not, if it's not me, you probably won't get as much in terms of things for you to do, things for you to address. It would be more addressed to the VC. Cool. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, slightly different question to tech DD, but we've also had customer due diligence. And have you ever been part of that, and has that differed?
Yeah, very interesting. So is this individual dentists who are doing that, or is it
no? So the larger corporates. So larger corporates, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
So where you have bigger accounts.
Yep.
For us, the questions have been more just around general security, few tick boxes, but nothing.
That's going to be what they're looking for, especially in healthcare, is and anything else of fintech will be similar. I remember one I got from Goldman Sachs when I was in the city, and it was a giant list of it was a spreadsheet with 500 rows or something, and everyone had yes or no, and the correct answer was yes to each one. So you wanted to go through and figure out how you could say yes to each thing, and one of them was, have you glued shut all of the USB ports on all of your computers in your office? Because they wanted us to guarantee that you couldn't take a little stick and shove it into your computer and take away their data. We answered that one no, but we explained why. And these were all very security focused. The occasional question on can you scale, and there'll be a part of that which will be the financial check. They want to check that you aren't going to go out of business. They want to be able to sue you if something bad does happen with a patient. So, but that won't concern you very much on the tech side. So fewer questions, almost none probably on people and process, very little on product and product direction, somewhat more on architecture. They're going to want to check that they won't overwhelm you and knock you out. They want to make sure that you have some documentation of any API that you might use, and they'll heavily index on security. They'll be asking you tons on security over and over again, and they'll really want to know that you're secure and safe. They'll want to know that you'll put your code in escrow and all kinds of other things to keep them safe, because it's a protection for them chiefly.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else I could help you with?
That's all from me. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Well, this has been fun. I'm glad that we could do this in public and get a few folks watching. And of course, it'll be out there on YouTube for people to watch later. Jay, really appreciate you coming along. This was fun to meet you and to chat to you about this. Feel free to come back to me later and ask some more questions. I enjoy talking like this, whether it's on office hours or not. And it looks like that worked. And thank you also for being part of my tech test. So I'm verified that I can have a guest. It does work. We didn't fall over. We stayed live the whole time. So, and thanks to viewers for coming along and watching. We really appreciate that. And I'll be back again soon. I hope to put these on a regular schedule. I haven't quite got there yet, but I'm hoping this month to be able to say I'm on office hours each time you can set your calendar. Excellent. Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate having you on.
Thanks so much.
Excellent. Bye now. Bye, everybody.